Welcome to Our Dyke Histories. I'm your host, Jack Easking, historian, geographer, and environmental psychologist. We dive into the past and present of les, queer, trans, sapphic, MB communities decade by decade in collaboration with multicultural lesbian literary and art journal Sinister Wisdom. This season, we're all about dyke bars, with an asterisk. Lesbian bars, queer parties, and trans hangouts. The structures that made them necessary, the lives they made possible, and the worlds we made from them. Our Dyke Histories. Come for the history, stay for the revolution, gossip, and desire that built us. Hello, Our Dyke History listeners. Welcome back for part 2 of the extraordinary, fantastic, and so incredibly important Roey Thorpe. Before we go any further, heads up, this is our last glorious episode of Season 1, and it's delectable. We're going to pick up right where we left off, talking about gender expression, how limited the ideas were before the trans tipping point. We're also going to dig into the key role of sex workers in the history of les, bi, queer, trans people, the racialized politics of all of our spaces, and how lesbian mid-20th century Midwest Black lesbian softball teams defended their picnics. It is an awesome chat. As a reminder, Roey Thorpe is an activist and scholar who, in the 1990s, started writing a master's thesis on the history of Black queer women's spaces in Detroit from the 1930s to the 1970s, and whose professors told her it wasn't very interesting or important, to the point that she didn't finish it. However, she did write 2 chapters, and those chapters are widely taught and read in the United States and beyond. They're incredibly important documents, and dear Roey didn't know that anyone had been reading them all this time. We start this part of our conversation by talking about the central role of sex work in les, bi, queer, trans life, particularly Black queer life. I encourage you to take a second and think back through history and the kind of occupations that women and trans people have been allowed to have. While in the mid-20th century, there are an enormous amount of white butch and trans mass folks being able to secure union jobs, somebody like Leslie Feinberg, for example, or Jess Goldberg in Stone Butch Blues, Black queer and trans folks get some of those jobs, but in a much more limited capacity. And if you don't want to be relegated to a cis heterosexual marriage, and you want your independence, one of the top jobs for a working class woman or trans person to take was being a sex worker. Now, Roey, tell us all about it.
Like, there was a person who I interviewed who pimped for a living. So was a pimp named Golden Tongue Larry.
Oh my goodness. What a type.
Yes. And when I said, how did you get that nickname? Larry said, girl, how do you think I got that nickname? I was like, oh my God. But anyway, so all of Larry's neighbors called Larry he. And like straight people in the community called Larry he. Now, Larry was like openly female bodied, but masculine, and sort of lived on that edge of gender. But even the broader Black community recognized Larry's masculinity and called Larry Larry. And I don't know what Larry's birth name was, and no one knew, right? That person that Larry was, I thought was a lesbian. But I don't think today we would understand Larry as a lesbian. I think we would understand Larry as either trans or, non-binary.
And how would Larry talk about him herself, right?
Larry was a rough character who was, in fact, pimping for a living. Larry schooled me that I was not supposed to say a pimp. Larry was not a pimp. That isn't a thing. Pimping is a verb. And femme women, some of whom were queer, were the women the sex workers that Larry was pimping. And that was a whole side of the culture that I had not ever encountered before. And I met women who were queer, who were Black queer women and Black queer studs who were, Larry was not the only pimp that I met. And it just was part of the culture as well, and I think that's one that we don't often think about.
No, and Joan Nestle said that a million times, right? We don't talk about sex workers enough as part of our history and culture, and
Yeah,
sex workers who might have been straight were also hanging out in these spaces because they were spaces where there's a little less judgment, and we've also talked in other episodes that it's not that you can't even have a public space where women can drink, people identified then as women, until the 30s, until prohibition really comes in,
yeah,
because until then you could have like a tea room like Eve Adams or Eliza Jimmy Creswell in New York City, but just this kind of ability to drink and be in public. And something else you talk about that's awesome, because it's a thing that happened in history that I was shocked that happened in history in Detroit and anywhere, because it's really something that's really more common in the 1970s. And the great sentence you write is to take lesbian bar culture out of the darkness of the bar and quite literally bring it into the daylight required courage and mutual support. And what you're talking about is the picnics of the Palais, aka the Pit, which opens in 1945. It's open for
yes,
25 years. That's long-staying presence. You describe a bartender, everybody puts their spare change in a brandy snifter, and then the bartender, who's a dyke, is
yes.
gonna be responsible for community. They're gonna take all the money, and everyone uses it together for a picnic, which is adorable. And I would love to read the quotes. Is that okay if I describe it? There's okay, more from Billy Hill.
Please.
Quote, "The bartender would be in charge of it, and she'd go and get hot dogs and buns and chicken. I know the one time she bought 100 small frying chickens, and they took them all to the bar and cut them all up. And then we all went out to a park, and they built a barbecue, and they had a heart barbecue chicken dinner out there, you know? They bought a couple of packs of potatoes, and somebody made potato salad, and somebody made coleslaw, and then took all these chickens out to the park and had big barbecue chicken. There would be maybe 75, 100 people at these things. There's like 100 dykes in public together, which is wild. There is a frightening incident described about how many people it was. There's 15 guys chasing and coming after the dykes, and the lesbians, dykes, transes pick up the baseball bats and go back after them. They know that they're unsafe. They bring these things with them. Also, I'm sure there's like, is there early softball? Like, gosh knows.
Yeah, they're playing softball, and
I love it.
yeah, the women of the Palais loved playing softball. So, yeah,
That's so cool. I
yeah, yeah,
and softball is just so 70s, so we don't I just didn't I've never heard about it back in the 40s and 50s. That's so cool. That's amazing. Yeah,
yeah,
and that there's also they sponsor birthday parties, lesbian and gay weddings, and even baby
yes,
showers for regular people. This
yes.
is just like, and there's another quote from Carol. Quote, "The night that Marilyn took me, there was a wedding there, and one was in a tuxedo, one was in a wedding gown, and for first experience, it was unbelievable. Unbelievable what we walked into." And then Bev, a friend of Carol, says, quote, "They went to the Palais, and I guess there was a marriage ceremony going on. And one of the women wearing a tux, the other a white gown, and she said, they actually had a ceremony. They think they're married. Can you believe it? Two women." And you described this as magic, and I thought it was magic. That's amazing. That's so cool. Your bar
Yeah,
marries you. Yeah,
yeah,
right? In this kind of time when you couldn't even imagine it, and it's in the same area as the Sweetheart.
that's right. Yeah, it's its own
And what do you mean by
space.
that? What does he mean its own space?
Well, I mean that the bar was it was self-contained. There weren't different areas where straight people could come in. Straight people were not welcome at the
Wow.
Palais. Yeah. And the way that they policed that was by having some really tough bouncers, and if you happened to wander into that bar, you would wander out really fast if you were straight.
And that's early happening, right? And that's amazing.
Absolutely.
Like, having a space that's just for us and saying it's just for us. It's before any kind of protections or ideas or identities, and it's not happening often. Like, I've not heard about that many bouncers being able to keep out anybody. It sounds like heterosexuals didn't wanna go, or they would go in groups, but the idea of slumming starts to shift too, because you have this mass of white people, especially in Detroit, especially in New York City. So many cities are moving to this horrible place called the suburb. It's my opinion. This horrible place called the suburbs. And so you're also segregating the city from the suburb, and you're segregating places even more.
Well, and the Palais was pretty race
Yeah.
segregated. It was very white. And the only black women who were able to be in the Palais had to sort of follow the unspoken rules, which was you don't date the white women, you don't
Ugh.
compete for the attention of white women. I think it was just a very unwritten rule. And then you also you go by yourself. Like you don't go with a group of black women to the Palais. You go by yourself and then you're less threatening.
And this is something that always comes up in the discussion of black queer women about going one on one because in groups
Mhm,
you're threatening. And also that's something Pat Parker
mhm.
figures out in Henta and her softball team. Sarah Ellen Strongman talked about that. Um, that only when black queer women have a softball team of their own and they start chatting, they're like, oh my gosh, this happens to you. Like, this happens to you at the bar, this happens to you, and realizing anywhere
Mm,
they go as a group that they're seen as threatening and starting to put that together, like, "Can we be a group? How can we do this?" And this is in San Francisco in the Bay Area, Oakland.
interesting.
Yeah, and so, there's more bars happening too. There's La Rosa's and Canine Bar and what did they look like? Did they have people have pictures of them, or did they draw them or describe them?
I think I did see pictures that I was able to find online at the time that, online was a new sort of thing and sometimes involved microfilm,
Yeah.
my version of online. But they just look like regular bars,
Yeah.
you know? They just look like regular corner bars. They were not distinguishable at all. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
How many were there?
Oh my gosh. No, I mean, there were a ton of them over
You think
time. I think probably 12 to 15 is a really
that's a
good
lot.
estimate.
Yeah.
At one point, yeah, I mean, because it was just very much part of the bar culture. Like 12 to 15 is a zillion compared to what we have now when you think about,
Yeah.
lesbian bars that are practically non-existent.
Yes.
But at the time, that was like a tiny slice of how many overall bars there were
Yes.
in Detroit,
Yeah.
which, there was a bar on every corner. It was like such a big part of the community there.
Wow. That's so cool.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and for those of you who don't know, because of youth or you've forgotten, microfilm was the miniaturization. You could put a whole page of a newspaper in like a square inch, and then you'd sit in front of this massive machine and it would blow it up, and so you could zoom through, but there's no text search. You're just reading and praying and hoping to
Yeah,
find
you're spending hours
hours.
staring into the machine, moving a handle to advance it,
Yeah.
and hoping that you see the thing you're looking for.
Yeah. There's another bar, Fred's, so there's, like, a white middle class space that opens for 5 years in
Mhm.
1952, and there's a lot about, like, what is safe and who can be here, but what's amazing reading the chapter, Creating a Place of Our Own, for those who wanna read it and should read it, it's so good, is that you can see how the changing norms of gender and sexuality and race are also shaping this and shaping the city and how people can make space. In creating a place of our own, Roey writes that white lesbian bars, particularly middle class white lesbian bars, had to actually change their physical location, their appearance, and their interior over time to keep attracting a middle class clientele. Middle class women, she writes, were unlikely to visit places regularly where harassment and exposure were strong possibilities. For these owners, keeping their business open and free from vice raids required creativity and subtlety. Fred's also, as Roey writes, went a step further than the Palais to ensure the anonymity that middle class women desired. Rather than providing separate rooms for heterosexuals and lesbians, Fred's excluded heterosexuals altogether by having a back door entrance. Billy Hill, who I've quoted before, said, quote, "At Fred's, the front was boarded and blocked up. There was no front door to go in. You'd go down this little alleyway and knock on the back door. So the people in the neighborhood, they didn't even know there was a bar there, see? You had to go and knock on the back door and identify yourself before they ever let you in." Billy Hill also, quote, "didn't care for Fred's," per Roey, even though she remembers that if you had a date and you wanted to go and dance, to a nice place, you take your girl to Fred's. But if you were out hounding around and whoring around, then you went to the Palais. Also, things to bring back from the past, hounding around, y'all. I wanted to ask you, now that you look back, is there anything you didn't get to write about or you wanna mention from your other work that you want people to know about or other stories that you wanted to tell?
I mentioned how I feel like I didn't see trans
Yeah.
people when I should have. I think too, I mean, because there were like fully 10% of the people I interviewed, or maybe more,
Yeah.
it openly said to me if I could transition today. If it was today, I would transition.
Yeah.
They were that blatant with me. So there was that I missed. I think there were other things that I missed. Like I didn't have a nuanced enough lens of class among Black queer people who lived as studs and fishes and lesbians. I had the inklings of some of it, but I didn't have a deep enough understanding of how it worked. I know that it was more inclusive. The community was more inclusive. It was more inclusive gender wise. And there were more people um, who had grown up having seen or known someone who was queer, even if it wasn't spoken about. I think they started even very early on. People who came of age in like the 40s and 50s
Wow.
had seen people like, now it wasn't spoken of and it wasn't exactly accepted, but because the communities were smaller, the Black communities were smaller and more interdependent, that
Yes.
people depended on each other, right? And were being in a racist culture, there was a level of interdependence that they counted on each other for, and so they were willing to overlook differences
Yes.
in ways that, despite religion, despite other things, like that, it meant that the Black lesbians were way more likely to have grown up having seen or known people who were queer,
Yeah.
and they might be whispered about, right?
Yeah.
And then later they came to understand what the whispering was about and to get it, and then to think, oh, that's like me.
Yeah.
So that there was some sense of people that had come before you, and a sense of history that white people did not have. White lesbians did not have that. And so that was something really powerful.
Yeah.
And I think something that is, it's really remarkable, and it's a gift in many ways, you
Yeah.
know?
It is, and it's also creates different solidarities even now that have come down intergenerationally, and whiteness really segregated itself by class as if, having money and maintaining middle class mores would keep you safer, and that's something that lots of people have written about the daughters of Bilitis out in San
Yeah.
Francisco in the 1950s when they're forming as the first what will become the first national lesbian group in the United States. They don't wanna be in working class bars. In fact, the daughters of Bilitis or Bilitis, we can back and forth about that forever, y'all. When they were founded in the 1950s, they were founded by a Filipinx woman, Rose, who was so gay, dating another woman named Rose, and they just wanted a place to dance. It's ironic that two women of color started what became a very white middle class organization because they wanted to dance. And this organization took a hard line against any kind of working class lesbian bars as being a place they did not want to be associated with. They really wanted to extol respectability politics. We're just like you. We have jobs like you. But Rose and Rose, they just wanted to dance. I wanted to take us back. You mentioned Ruth Ellis earlier, and we have to tell everyone who Ruth Ellis is if they don't know. And if we're going to talk about Ruth Ellis, we got to talk about rent parties too, which is how you mainly wrote about her in your other chapter. So please tell us about the magic of Ruth Ellis.
Well, I mean, okay, so Ruth Ellis was, I one of the oldest people that I interviewed for this project, and she was a Black lesbian. She lived to be like 104.
Yeah.
So the thing about Ruth, we became friends, and a lot of people say that they were friends with Ruth Ellis, but I'm a little skeptical, especially of white people who say they were friends with Ruth, because it's sort of like, she's a legend in so many ways. It's like how many people say they were at Stonewall.
Yeah. Or they knew Stormy
And so-
DeLeveret. Yeah. So many people say that. Oh, yeah, I knew her. I'm like,
yeah,
or
yeah,
them
yeah,
or him. Yeah. They're
exactly.
like, oh, yeah, I know. Well, totally, I know. Yeah.
Exactly. So Ruth Ellis and her partner at the time, Babe, who ended up passing away when Ruth was still young.
Mm.
Ruth and Babe, they managed to own a house. It was a duplex in Detroit. Well, they lived on the top floor and they rented out the bottom floor to gay men, and they would open up the house and have huge parties at their house. And you have to imagine this in the days before there were interstates, right?
Yeah.
There were roads, but there were not big interstate highways. So in the 30s and 40s, Ruth and Babe would have huge parties at their house all weekend. People would come and sleep on the floor and sleep in the beds and sleep on the couches. And Babe was a cook and she would make food for everybody. People would throw $1 or so into a pot to help them pay for it all. Sometimes they would give even a little more money if they had it to like help keep the whole thing going. And these parties were just legendary. And there were men and women, black men and women, who went to those parties, and they were just legendary. And it's how a lot of the people that I talked to for this research met each other, was through Ruth and Babe, and how they built community.
Yeah.
So it was just a safe place for people to go, and they were such vibrant parties with great music and dancing and just a chance to be together. And people would drive for hours to get to them.
Yeah. If anyone listening has seen A League of Their Own, the show, there's a rent party. There's a black rent party in it. I wouldn't be surprised if it is not based off of your description and Ruth Ellis's parties.
Well, I was contacted by the people producing the new League of Their Own as part of their research
Wow.
about lesbian life at the time. Yeah, it was very, very cool. That acknowledgement that, yeah, like lesbians were a big part of it.
And that's fantastic to have this vivid description. I'm just
Mhm.
gonna add in some quotes and some other things that you wrote about, which was that people came as far away as Cleveland, Dayton, Ohio, other parts of Michigan. And Ruth recalls that, quote, after we had lived around different places, we finally found this home and we bought it. Then all the gay people would come to our house. That was known as a house where queers go. Other people, like Margaret Lorick, shared that two gay men told her, quote, there's a place in Detroit where we know a lady where you can go and have parties at her house. She was excited to meet, quote, all gay people. Ruth would play music in the basement, serve drinks, and, quote, cook up these great big pots of food. Like sometimes she had string beans in one, carrots in another, some kind of meat, like hot dogs or anything like that. She'd also cook spaghetti for people. So there's this like real tradition of, as Cookie Woolner pointed out, these kind of spaces are traveling with the Great Migration. So they're traveling up to Detroit, up to New York City, and they're becoming part. And anywhere there are concentrations or groups of Black people, Black queer women are using this to make these spaces. They're just incredible. And really, one thing to take away from this, if you're like, whoa, where could we be or not be in terms of publicness? Rent parties are really private because they're in somebody's house. And most Black queer women are forced to just have rent parties for a very, very long time in most places. But Detroit having a bar in 1939 is mind blowing that Black queer women are gathering in public. That's so cool. So, so cool.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering too, and something I don't want to leave out, is it just Black queer women? Are there women of different races? Like who's showing up at these parties? And we talked a lot about gender, but like, is it just Black queer women hanging out by themselves?
So I interviewed a handful of Latinas.
Yeah.
They were very much in Latina culture
Yeah.
and in their home communities, but would sometimes socialize with Black women
Yeah.
as they were less welcome with white women, but they were there.
Yeah.
They were there. They were always there.
That's awesome.
And
Yay. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. I would imagine there's some racial diversity, but not a lot. But also, Latino women are not going to be welcomed by white women. Indigenous women
yeah,
are not going to be.
yeah.
Yeah. Arab women. And I feel absurd. I didn't bring this up immediately when you mentioned Reverend Renee McCoy, but religion is central in this.
Yes. Well, it was definitely a Black gay church. So Reverend McCoy's background was in MCC. And she has a million stories. She has such a long history in the LGBTQ community.
Yeah.
But that church was specifically welcoming of people of all classes and backgrounds and of people with HIV and AIDS. And like when I met them in the 90s, it was very welcoming of sex workers. It was very welcoming of Black trans women. I mean, it was at a time when the community that you saw there were professors, right? There were people of every background you could imagine, all of whom were Black, queer
And
identified.
getting to be together in community.
And yeah, and interpreting Christian theology as in its most accepting and loving form.
Yeah. LaToya Eves writes a lot about Black queer women in the South. Amazing geographer. And like religion is always central. Like you can't not have it. And it comes up among Black queer women. And it's something that white queer women historically have really rejected or stayed away from by like leaving the church. I will be safe. And really, we're seeing today in the 2020s that abandoning churches and religions comes back to haunt you because it gets versioned in a certain way against us. It's not just the amazing LaToya Eves writing about Black queer women and spirituality. Anyone who is studying Black queer spaces, looking at Indigenous queer spaces, looking at Latinx queer spaces, and so on, has to deal with religion. It is a particularly white construct that has left religion off the table in the study of queer history. And it's something that needs to be central because so much of white queerness has come from rejecting a church. Right now, as we're under attack from ICE and ever rising waves of authoritarianism and fascism, not only in this country, but other countries, even if we don't like it, we might have to start talking about it. Reading the work and the stories of Black queer women and trans folks and other BIPOC queer and trans people is an incredible place to start and contend with that for white people. For BIPOC queer trans people, you finally get to read something about yourself that reflects your real life. This has been just the coolest thing to get to ask the person whose chapters I've read a million times, like, what else? Oh my God, tell me everything. This is such a gift. Is there anything else you want to share?
Well, nothing except that I would just I would love to be in community with the scholars that are doing this work. I don't have much to add, but I would just love to meet them and know more about their work. And it's just been such a pleasure to meet you and to
Yeah.
hear about your work and to know that this chapter that is so long ago for me is still alive in some way.
And there's so many students still reading you and thinking of doing projects like that. I'm sorry that professor didn't get it, but a lot of other people did. You are definitely an academic in my heart. If you want to be, I don't know, a lot of people don't want to be, but
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, I mean, as someone else who is no longer professing in the academy, I don't know if I mentioned this in another episode, but left my tenure track job because there was no support for trans people at the University of Kentucky to get to a doctor's appointment within 2.5 to 3 years, and no
Sure.
support for my students. Yeah, and so we make our community otherwise. This has been so awesome. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
No, like
Thank
thank you in
you.
a big way, Roey Thorpe. You're awesome. Thank you to Roey and all of our guests and all of our listeners for an amazing first 12 episodes. I can't wait to get back to you in season 2 sometime this spring or summer with the magic of people like Sarah Schulman, Kemi Adeyemi, and every cool-ass thinker on everything from lesbian death in the 1990s to dyke bar commemoration in the 2010s. How we know how many dyke bars there have ever been and how we'll never know how many queer parties there are. We'll understand so much more about when, why, and where dyke bars closed and how they're still reviving. As always, send us notes and comments via email, Instagram, Blue Sky, or post comments wherever you get your podcasts. We love to hear from you. We send you so much light and peace in these hard times, and we'll see you next season. I want to send a special thanks to Audrey Wilkinson, Becca Moses, and Cade Waldo for their incredible work in making this podcast possible with me, as well as the amazing members of the rest of our team. Thanks for tuning in to Our Dyke Histories in collaboration with Sinister Wisdom. Connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Our Dyke Histories. Follow and support me, Jack Giesking, via my newsletter, Queer Geographies at queergeographies.com. It's packed with everything we couldn't fit into this podcast. Our Dyke Histories is run by a queer, dykey, and mighty team. ODH is hosted, edited, and produced by Jack Easking, co-produced and co-edited by Cade Waldo, and co-edited by Mel Weitzel. Our social media manager is Audrey Wilkinson, and our fabulous interns include Michaela Hayes, Sid Gunthart, Paige LeMay, Sophie McLean, and Sarah Parsons. Our theme song, Like Honey, was graciously gifted to us from Kid Orion at kidorion.com. We're forever grateful to our co-producer, Julie Enzer, and the entire team at Sinister Wisdom. Publishing since 1976, Sinister Wisdom recognizes the power of language to reflect diverse, multicultural lesbian experiences and to enhance our ability to develop critical judgment as lesbians evaluating our community and our world. We share our dyke histories so we know more about who we are, how we were, and what we fight to never forget. Let's keep doing it, y'all.